Okay, let's get started. All right, so this is the second consciousness dialogue for theorists and experimentalists. And today with Alex Meyer, I'm going to talk about this Elon Musk's Neuralink revolutionize consciousness research. So to give you a couple of, a bit of the context, here's the tiny URL for Elon Musk's presentation of the entire video, and we are particularly interested in this particular person's statement here. We are just gonna play it.
I have, in many ways, a very basic science interest, which is I'm really interested in the nature of consciousness, and there's a lot of very silly philosophy that's been written about it over the last 1,000 years. But I think that we've been very limited by the tools and our ability to interrogate and measure the brain. And as these tools get better, it will pull it into the realm of physics. And it's really one of the last big, great mysteries in science.
Okay, so that was the final Q&A session of the Elon Musk's presentation. And this presentation was all about their latest technology that we are going to cover, and maybe Alex can give a little bit of the explanation here.
Yeah, so basically the technology that Neuralink as a company is working on is a massive electrode array that will allow for recording the activity of many, many neurons at the same time. The way that they phrase it is that they said they want to have reading and writing. So that sounds like they try not only to record the activity of neurons, which is what they talked about in that presentation that happened last year, but also that they want to be able to stimulate neurons and therefore causally impact the brain. And the thrust of their program is to make this available to humans, which I think is a major step in basically in all of neuroscience, because some of this technology, similar technology, may already be available for animal models, but doing this in humans is going to be extremely exciting. And my understanding is that they already have FDA approval, so they're moving very fast towards being able to put this in humans.
Right. And by the way, this is a part of the paper Elon Musk published in 2019, an integrated brain-machine interface platform with thousands of channels. And there they explain about this, electrodes. And here's the size of the electrodes, and also this itself already has thousands of contacts and also stimulators on it, right?
Exactly. So, and that is very important for their philosophy. So my understanding and having followed them a little bit since their inception is that they are worried about brain damage that inserting electrodes could cause. So by making it very small, you're making it possible that you're not only don't have to be worried as much, but you can put many of those electrodes nearby without maybe causing major bleeding and so on. And so one thing that the company did is, because it seems to have a great engineering background, is to develop a robot that can insert these electrodes almost like a sewing machine. So very fast, probably moving and inserting these very tiny, fine needles in the brain surface, and with minimal damage probably to the tissue. And so that means that not only with each of these shanks, you will have thousands of contact points, maybe hundreds of neurons recorded at the same time, but you can put many of those all around the brain, and so almost go exponentially up in terms of the number of neurons that you'll be able to read out at a time.
And so this is a figure for the machine sewing kind of technology, right?
Yeah, it's a... Go ahead.
My question from sort of the naive non-experimentalist is that so this is going to be almost impossible if you are doing it as an experimentalist by hand, right?
Yes. I think that's correct. I think that being able to have this done by robots or machinized will take away a lot of also expertise that would be needed maybe on the side of neurosurgeons, that only very few people would be able to do it. And so clearly they're thinking about making this a technique that might be actually mass compatible, that you could do this maybe in many, many hospitals across the country, and eventually maybe not only just in patients, but also in normal people. So this might be a step towards what some people are thinking about in terms of enhancing our own brain function by merging machine and computers. But the first step for sure would be in the clinical arena. And so that is what they were talking about in that presentation as well.
I see. Yeah, in the presentation, with respect to what you said, they show a bunch of pigs walking around, and then they say that it's totally safe. That and they have been observing safety for several months and so on. Yeah, and this is a part of the machine that shows the thing or record the activity, I think.
Yeah, it's very impressive. So one problem that anybody who has worked with similar electrodes is familiar with is that our hands turn out to be too large for manipulating something that's as small. So there are similar electrodes available already for researchers, and they're about as thick, a little bit thicker as a human hair. And so trying to manipulate these, the little tremor, the little trembling that your hand has becomes a major problem. And then also interfacing electrodes such as this with the apparatus that might be needed, not only to implant them, but also then to read out signals can lead to this kind of cascading of having something that starts out very small, get into something very large. So some of the recordings that I watched, people using similar electrodes, it looked very similar, that the tiny electrode was, there was a giant tower on top of that. The way that Elon Musk is trying to get around this is that eventually, and that is, I think, what he's done with the pigs, and now I saw with monkeys as well, is that he will use telemetry. So there will be something outside the brain on the skull that can read out these electrodes and then converts the signal into radio signals, so that you can have a receiver nearby and you can read out those neurons and the activity of these neurons without having cables or other apparatuses that might be hindering your movement. So it's very exciting technology that seems to be progressing extremely fast.
So about the telemetry thing, that's about thing that was already recorded and also pre-processed here and then sent out the output, right? So, but this part, I have a question. So here, this is the inserting machine, and this itself is probably going to be very expensive or not really available for many experimenters at the moment, right?
That's a really good point. So the and it raises a lot of questions. I think it came up in the talk as well. And the solution to that, generally speaking, I think is mass production. That the more you can produce of something, the cheaper it gets. And so I think that was one of the answers to the concern that this technology may be expensive. And it was certainly talked about that one of the ideas is trying to make it more affordable so that it could be used more widely. But certainly in the beginning, it will be extremely expensive. I agree with you. And so only if it takes hold and things progress can this become cheaper. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a similar technology already available to researchers, and so those electrodes, they actually happen to be cheaper than a lot of the other alternatives that are available at this point.
Wait, Alex. So the similar technology we are talking about right now is about this robot induced implantation technology.
Good point. No, I'm just talking about electrodes that are very, very thin and that have a lot of contact points. So these are,
yeah, that's no,
yes.
But my impression was that they're probably most critical invention, the Teslas, Elon Musk's invention was this part, right? Like robot controlling this insertion part, and then reproducible and very, very precisely and scalable, that part, maybe other company can also do something like that, at least for the animal experiments, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree with that. And I have many questions. I could imagine that some of the problems that neurophysiologists are struggling with by inserting electrodes otherwise might be solvable by having perfect control about the pressure, the speed, and other things with which these insertions are happening. And if I remember things correctly, the Neuralink company also talked about maybe using imaging technology to make sure that knowing where the blood vessels are, and then maybe trying to make sure that you're not hitting any blood vessels while you're inserting these electrodes, which would help provide, make sure that there's no mini strokes happening in the brain as this technique is happening. But I think they probably have to fight on many fronts. The telemetry that we talked about, that you read out these brain signals with radio signals, there's many issues involved with that in terms of what distance these signals can project to. And then battery is a big issue with that one in terms of how long can you have a battery on there without having to replace it to read this out? And of course, being also involved in Tesla and other battery component factories, they are probably leading edge when it comes to that. But I see them fight on many fronts. So the electrodes is one of them, the insertion is another one, and then this whole radio readout will be another big engineering challenge.
Yeah, okay, great. And then this is a kind of the example of the application of this technology to mice or rats, I think, and rat actually. So they implanted like Indian 3,000 channels, and then they are doing this through the USB-C channel, I think.
Yeah, and what's exciting? Go ahead.
What?
What's exciting, I think, for consciousness research is that by combining that, you can read out many neurons at the same time, but also doing it across the brain. I think that is what makes this technology really exciting. So it's not only that you can read many neurons at one point, which is interesting enough, but also, as shown here, that you could do it all over the brain. It basically gets to something, to say it more cheekily, like fMRI, but on the single neuron level, that you can look at the entire brain, what the entire brain is doing at any point in time with basically real-time resolution, perfect time resolution, and also at the level of single neurons. Of course, you would never get all of the neurons. You would always have a subsample of the neurons that are active, but in terms of recording the activity of neuron across the brain, it's just been 1-2 decades that people were able to record neurons in different parts of the brain at the same time. So we've gone from being able to record a single neuron, to record multiple neurons, to record neurons in different parts of the brain, now to this, where it will be almost like covering an entire brain. Admittedly, in this case, it's a very tiny mouse brain, but almost covering the entire brain at once. So that's why fMRI on the single neuron level.
Yeah, so this is one of the figures that we published in the paper that we published last year. And you're saying that in 1950s, it started with a single neuron recording, electrodes per probe. So it's more in terms of the number of the neurons recording, but it's hitting like this. And then now NeuroPixel is here, and even more probably right now, right?
That's right. So this is NeuroPixel 0.1. And so NeuroPixel has just jumped to NeuroPixels 2.0. And so these NeuroPixels, those are the currently available electrodes to researchers that are the closest thing to what Elon Musk is working on as well. Yeah. So these are also tiny hair-like electrodes that you can insert, in this case, not with a robot, in the mouse brain, as shown here to the right, and record hundreds of neurons at the same time.
Yeah. So yeah, what Alex mentioned as a NeuroPixel 2.0 is the recent paper here, huge author list here, and this NeuroPixel 2.0 is smaller, I think, and also have more probes per NeuroPixel.
And it can be chronic. So the original NeuroPixels, they were inserted and then removed, but this is more like what Elon Musk is working on, that they stay in the brain. And so you can record the activity over many days and weeks.
I see. So here it says neuron tracking was 90% successful for up to 2 weeks and 80% successful up to 2 months. I see.
So yeah, so this means, of course, for people interested in consciousness, we can look at sleep, we can look at learning, we can look at a lot of things that happen not only on the timescale of milliseconds or hundreds of milliseconds. This is often done in the consciousness research of vision, but we will be able to look at states that last much longer time periods, again, on the single neuron level across the entire brain. So it's, and then in the case of Elon Musk, of course, in humans. So that is why this is all very exciting to witness. And the progress is happening. This is not science fiction. This is something that will happen in the next 5 years.
Yeah, okay. And is there anything to talk particularly about, first of all, Elon Musk's paper about this one? This is already covered pretty much, or should we talk a bit? Maybe?
Yeah, I think it is interesting that a leading figure in this company is also interested in consciousness. So I think it reiterates that although this technology has the potential to help patients and to uncover many other things in neuroscience, people who are interested in consciousness research, I think, can be rightfully quite excited about the amount of data that we will be getting here. And another thing to mention is the sheer amount of data that we're talking about here, which I think is another challenge that maybe didn't get discussed in the Neuralink discussion, but that is, I think, worth mentioning. So we are talking about terabytes on terabytes of data. And what this might lead to is that the field will become maybe a little bit more divided in terms of people that are experimentalists and collecting a lot of these data, and then people that can help with dealing with these large amounts of data. So in other words, there will be so much data available that there will be a big need for people that are interested in data science and big data, machine learning, AI, in able to help to make sense of these data. And so it will be massive. So what people usually think about when they hear big data will be superseded on orders of magnitude with these kinds of data. So the fact that in contrast to other techniques in neuroscience, we're talking here recording on the order of milliseconds, but also with a certain bit depth, within an hour, you will have terabytes of data. So doing this for many days or weeks, you can imagine how quickly that explodes. So that's another exciting frontier, I think, that is worth starting to think about how we will manage these data, how we'll analyze this data, in addition to what paradigms could be studied with these kinds of technologies.
Yeah, so that's actually quite interesting, kind of the point that we should also discuss here. One of the moves that people are starting to do, for example, in Allen Institute, is to make the data available as they collect, right?
Yes.
Open science kind of practice, like Allen Institute. And also another thing is that for them, they allow the experimenter, the theorists actually, to propose a new experiment and ask these experimentalists to collect the data as they think will be most informative. So something like that is going to be open proposal kind of thing. I don't know how it's called.
I think Christoph calls it brain observatories.
Yeah, brain observatory. Is it the name of the initiative for asking them to do the kind of experiments?
So my understanding is that the initial idea of brain observatories rested mostly on two photon imaging and imaging
Yeah.
techniques. But
Yeah.
the general idea to say that in astrophysics, if we buy a huge expensive observatory, but then everybody who's interested can submit a proposal and get time to observe that part of the universe that they're interested in, that the same would be able to be here. So the Elon Institute is a leading developer of these NeuroPixels probes, and so that is really exciting to see that would be a step in the future, that you could think of a paradigm of an experiment, it could be done, and then you do that, you get proposed, and then you get the data. You don't have to do the experiment yourself, and then you could just do the analysis.
Okay, that's great. And one thing, maybe as a sort of to conclude this, relatively short session today, I've been always thinking that, if we can get this kind of data in, let's say, particular areas of the brain, say, the areas that are highly related to color perception, there is some kind of experimental, details and also complication about that. But let's hypothesize that there is an area responsible for mainly color, like V4, V8, and also face perception, such as FFA, and another one, motion perception, MT. If we can recall thousands of neurons in each of the areas, but also together with the knowledge of the anatomical connectivity between each of them, then that should be able to at least, give us a much better hint that why these different areas have to be differentially involved in, color or, face or visual motion. And that's, I think, would be relatively, among many, very difficult kind of issues within consciousness, relatively low-hanging fruit kind of project, I think. What do you think that, is the prospect of getting the anatomical data on top of this?
Yeah, so one thing that I find exciting about the Elon Institute is that they also have the technology to do things like that, and to also combine it with molecular tracing, molecular tools, including they can do things not with the NeuroPixel, but in general, that they can record neurons, and then after they're done recording them, suck out the nucleus and get the genome. And so they're technically capable of basically not just looking at neurons and what they're doing, but also find out more about what these neurons actually constitute of, and maybe find different types of neurons depending on their cell type. One thing that these electrodes already have shown that we didn't think about that might be able to do is that they give us two-dimensional representations of the spikes of the action potentials. And so there's a chance here that we might be learning that genetically different neurons might produce different electric signatures in terms of these action potentials. And then we could basically already make inferences in terms of about what types of neurons, maybe what connectivity, what areas are involved in these kinds of questions. So yes, I totally agree. That's another really interesting prospect of doing this.
Okay.
And so maybe lastly, somebody who's wondering, okay, so what's the big deal? So I think that we both might share this intuition that a lot of the philosophy that is critical about what neuroscience can do to answer the questions about consciousness is relying on thought experiments saying, let's imagine we know everything about the brain. Let's imagine you can record every neuron. Let's imagine these things, right? And then saying, well, even if that were the case, you can't explain consciousness. And these experiments, of course, these thought experiments, of course, they rely on us thinking about something that we don't know what it's going to be like. So I think it's going to be interesting to actually get in that position, that we will get data that is approaching that level, that we get these neurons, what to do, and then there might be things happening to our thinking about what the brain is doing with relation to consciousness that we're not thinking about yet. So when we were recorded with one electrode and one neuron at a time, we didn't think much about noise correlations or other things that happen in neural populations. So getting this new perspective on the brain, I think is going to be very exciting, and I would be surprised if there aren't surprises.
Okay, great. On that note, maybe should we show some of the most, sort of surprising kind of data from them?
Okay. All right.
Gertrude. Thanks for coming out. So what the beeps you're hearing are real-time signals from the Neuralink in Gertrude's head. So this Neuralink connects.
Okay, so this kind of thing actually is now available to record from many areas in the brain and also potentially from the awake humans. Doing
Unbelievable, unbelievable. Yeah, it's great to be living through these times, and younger researchers. I can only tell you that you're here at the right time with these things becoming available. So both on the experimental and the analysis side, this is going to be very exciting.
Okay, great. Thank you.